Welcome to the Coach Toolbox. This podcast is for coaches, leaders, and learners at all levels in organizations and in all walks of life. Here, you will get just-in-time learning that is research-based and practice-focused. The goal is personal and professional mastery. And now, our session today. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to welcome to our show Dr. Dawn Graham. And she's going to talk about something that's really important for all of us at this point in time. And that's in ways to be relevant in our careers today. And given the lockdown, given the last 7 weeks, given what many of us would be going through in terms of uncertainty of our career, I think this is going to be an amazing conversation. More so, not only just the topic, but because of who Dawn is. So let me introduce her briefly. Dr. Dawn is a PhD and is one of the leading career coaches based in the US. She's the career director for the MBA program for executives at the Wharton School, and she supports business leaders there on making strategic career choices. She's a licensed psychologist and a former corporate recruiter, and also the host of SiriusXM, one of popular radio show. And she has a call-in show there called Dr. Dawn on Careers. She's also a regular contributor to the Forbes magazine and some really great stuff. And I'll put up links to her profile, to her website on the podcast description. And I encourage you to go check out some of her articles on the Forbes. Really amazing stuff. And more importantly, I think for all of us, she's got a book called Switchers: How Smart Professionals Change Careers and Seize Success. And this book is about empowering professionals to take charge of their careers. And it's packed with actionable tips, useful tools to guide us to look at what our next move could be, and then to have a plan to get there. And I'll put up the link to this book in the podcast description box. And perhaps if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about this book. So Dawn, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. That was such a generous introduction. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And last few weeks, as I mentioned, have been life-changing, career-changing. And in addition to the dramatic shift in the way we live and work, there are some dark clouds, especially in India, and I think other places also, dark clouds in terms of pay cuts or loss of jobs, or it's getting so much more difficult for people to get new jobs. So given this environment, it seems it's harder to be relevant in our careers, and we are working hard and harder and harder, yet career success seems elusive. So Dawn, tell us what's missing.
Yes. Now, after all of that doom and gloom, let's talk about how to come out of that. But it is true. I think one of the things we know now with the current circumstances in the economy is that the job search, as well as staying relevant in our careers, have become much more competitive. And the reason for that is because, like you mentioned, layoffs, furloughs. And so everybody's kind of scrambling now. If you have not lost your job, if you're one of the lucky ones, you're a little bit worried about that happening. And so everybody's trying to figure out, how do I stay relevant? How do I make sure that the people who are making the decisions recognize the value that I bring to the organization? And that value has somewhat shifted because a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to best serve customers and how to create their products and services in a way that aligns with the current restrictions that we're all facing. So everybody is scrambling a little bit and trying to figure out where their place is in the organization. And if it's not something you've really thought about prior to this, it can be a little scary because now everything's a little bit more ambiguous.
So true. And it seems like in the old days, especially in our Indian culture, the belief was if I work hard, my boss will look after me and my work will speak for itself. And I found in my executive coaching practice, up to a certain level, this seems to hold true. But middle to senior management and senior to CXO level, this just seems to collapse. Working hard is not enough.
Exactly. It's definitely not optional. Working hard is something that will be recognized. Outstanding performance is something that will be recognized and expected, but it isn't enough. And if that's the only tool you have in your toolbox, you're going to find that as you progress in your career, or as we face economic uncertainty like we're facing now, it's not enough. And it's hard because I think we're seeing some of the most celebrated employees at some companies being furloughed because their services aren't in need. And that's really surprising to them. But if that's the only tool they've been using, then leadership doesn't know what else to do with them. They don't understand. Are they adaptable? Do they have other skills I can use? Or maybe the higher ups don't even know about them. So if you're not visible, you could do great work, but if nobody knows about it, those decision makers at the table are thinking about who they need to execute their latest strategy, then you're not even coming to mind. And so a big part of that has to do with how you build your brand within the company and also who knows about it. So who's in your network? One of the professionals I had on my radio show not too long ago was Carla Harris, and she's managing director at Morgan Stanley in New York City. And she says something, she has 2 books, and she talks about the fact that often the decisions that are made about our career when we're not in the room, meaning that the executives, the C-suite, or the people who know what's happening in the future of the organization, who are setting strategy, or who know we're getting a new customer, who know what projects are shifting, are thinking about who can we engage to take these roles in the organization. And if they don't know about you and they don't know that you're a stellar performer and you've not been visible to them, they may not think of you, not because you're not qualified, but because you haven't been put in front of them. So I think that's a really important thing for all of us to think about. That outstanding performance is great, but if the people who make the decisions aren't aware of that, then we only have half of what we need to be successful.
That's so true. And we need to therefore be in the line of sight of these folks who make the decision. So what you're saying is we need to know who they are, and then get in front of them, because just the once in a year performance review is that's not how these senior level decisions get made.
It's not. It's often just-in-time decisions that, a crisis comes up or a situation like we're in now, and they think, who do we know we can rely on to be agile? Who can function in ambiguous situations and get the job done? Who has been able to morph and think critically and problem solve when we've needed them? And if you've not had the ability to do that, not because you're not skilled at it, but because it just hasn't been put in front of you, then you may not get selected. And I'm sure people are thinking, well, that's not fair. And you're right, it's not fair. But the good news is that we all have some control over that visibility. It may not be given to us by the organization, and our boss may not do a great job of giving us the tools to do it. But in those cases, it's even more important that each professional be proactive to ensure they're doing it for themselves.
You've said the magic word, I think, to be proactive. And my sense is that many times when these conversations are happening, one's immediate boss may not be there to say, hey, look, here's Tom or here's Ram, he's good. And so therefore, one really has to be in front of these stakeholders over the long term prior to that decision being made. So it's about, like you said, building visibility. Is that the same as building personal brand equity or leadership presence? Because we hear a lot of these words, and we know it's required, but one's really not sure what it means.
Right. There's no operational definition. So it's what does that really mean? And I look at a visibility strategy as encompassing your brand and your leadership presence. So I look at a brand as what you're known for. Very simple. What do people recognize you as an expert in? What do people know about you in terms of how you approach your work? Are you reliable? Do you show up? Do you follow through? Can you be trusted? Likability is a big part of that because people enjoy working with others who are cooperative and they don't have to do a lot of pulling, their teeth to figure out what's going to come next. So I think that's a part of it. So if that's your brand, once people know what you're known for, then the other part, leadership presence, is really how you show up in the room. So When you're in a staff meeting, even if you're not called on, do you share ideas? Do you celebrate others? Do you recognize your team? Are you speaking up? Do you show up on time? How do you present yourself physically, how you're dressed? So that's kind of more what I see as leadership presence. And I always think you should be striving for where you want to be. So always be thinking one step ahead versus where you are. So if you know you want to be at the next level, how do they dress? How do they show up? What types of activities are they getting into? And then all of that is encompassed in your visibility strategy. So once you know your brand and you're setting your brand, you could put it out there in a very intentional way. And that's kind of the key word, intentional. It's not enough just to assume that people are noticing. People certainly do notice, but they notice bits and pieces and we're very distracted. So are you making an intentional effort to put out there what you are known for and what value you bring to the organization?
That is awesome. So visibility, you said, is a combination of one's personal brand and leadership presence. And one needs to be intentional about this entire approach. So how do we do that? we're
Yes.
Struggling.
Well, that's all the time we have today. So yeah. Yeah, and this is great because I spend a lot of time coaching people on how to do this because I think people buy into the fact that if I'm not in the room and no one knows what I do, I'm not going to get selected. But what can I do about that if my boss isn't promoting me in these meetings or my boss isn't giving me these opportunities? And if your boss isn't, and let's face it, a lot of our managers don't, then this is where you have an opportunity to step up. And so I think the first thing you need to do is look at your job as quantifiable. Everything you do has an impact on the company's profitability or mission. And a lot of people, especially if you're in more entry-level roles in an organization, think that, how could that possibly be? I'm not, out there with the clients, or I'm not at the decision-making table. But the fact is, if you're getting a paycheck, what you're doing has an impact. So you have to start looking at yourself in the chain of success, is what I call it. So if you're, for example, if you're an administrative assistant and you schedule all the travel for your executives, then you're in that chain of success. You're in that process where if they're not getting to their meetings, if they're not meeting with their customers, then they're not selling business, which means the organization isn't making money. So I think when we all step back and start thinking about where do I fit in that chain, we start to see our value, and then we can quantify it. We can say, I've scheduled 10 trips this month, or I've spoken with 15 employees this month, or I've had 12 meetings, or I've come up with 3 new ideas. And I think when you start thinking like this, you can start writing it down and seeing your work in a new way versus this is just my job. And, this is what I'm paid to do, but rather this is how I'm contributing. This is the value that I add. So I think that's definitely step one.
So to focus on the value that one contributes or one brings to the job and to make it as quantifiable as possible. And this is so true because as you were speaking, I was thinking the majority of the industries in India are based on information technology. There is an attitude that if I'm a programmer, I'm doing the real work, but anybody else like L&D or HR or infrastructure, well, we're really not doing the real work. We're not contributing. And they seem to carry this attitude, which now is very unfortunate from what you're saying. So what you're saying is that these folks need to be able to quantify the value that they bring.
And I think that's really common in different organizations. I think every organization, like if you're in a consulting firm, the consultants are the star players because they're out there with the clients. And, pick a profession and there's usually that kind of key player that, and everybody else is in a supporting role. But I mean, that's the fact that if you look at it from a theater perspective, maybe the people on stage are the stars, but without people to build the sets, without people to design the costumes, without people to put the lights to shine on them, this isn't going to be a successful production. And I think when we can look at that and say, where do I fit in this? And recognize that it is important to the whole, then you can start quantifying what you're doing and seeing it as a value add versus, something that's just supplemental or very easily replaceable. Because the fact is, I always tell people if they're not sure what their value is to think about what happens if you don't show up tomorrow or the next day or the next day and no one's doing your job. Think about what starts to fall apart. And that can give you really good idea into where your value lies, because chances are the chain will start to break down if you're not there doing whatever piece you're doing. And then the whole falls apart. So people really need to understand where they fit in that chain of success. And once they do, it's pretty empowering to realize that, hey, it's not just my job. I actually contribute to something much bigger here.
I think that exercise is perhaps something that we should all start with, because that empowering attitude will go so much towards building the presence that we are also talking about. And I love what you say, the metaphor of the theater in terms of each person having value to add. Otherwise, the stars on stage can't do anything. So
Yes.
the first thing you've said is to be able to understand value and to quantify it. What else?
So once you quantify it, now people need to know about it. So you have to come up with a distribution plan. And perhaps you do have performance reviews in your company and you do them once a year. That's not enough. Even twice a year is not enough. I think most of us can quantify what we do probably on a weekly basis, but at a minimum on a monthly basis, and share this with our bosses or share this in our team meetings. Because sharing information, most people have some kind of staff meeting or team meeting where they go around and talk about their status, and it's really disorganized and you kind of throw a few key points, but it really makes a difference when you quantify your work, and if it lends itself or you're would like to put it in a graph or a chart or some kind of visual, and people start recognizing that. And I'll use the word we've been talking about, leadership presence, because you're taking what you're doing, you're quantifying it, now you're presenting it in a way that's pretty polished. And probably before long, other people will say, hey, that's kind of cool. I want to do that too, because I don't look so good next to somebody who's putting that effort in. So I think that distribution plan is really critical once you start quantifying. And if you're not meeting with your boss regularly, send this to your boss once a month or set up a meeting once a month. A lot of people believe that their direct manager knows what they're doing every day and knows how much work goes into it. But especially now, people are working remotely or their boss is really trying to put out fires above them and they're not paying as much attention. So don't take it for granted that your boss may not be fully aware of how hard you're working and what you're doing to create success on the other side. I think it's important to show them, and over communicate is a word I use right now, because in this situation where we're all remote and we're all sheltering in place, then it's even that much more important to send a weekly email saying, here's what I've been working on. Here's where I could use your support. And here's an accomplishment that, I wanted to be sure you knew about.
So I think the word distribution plan sums it up pretty accurately. But as you were speaking, one of the things that was coming to my mind is some of us, especially in India, we're going to say, hey, but I don't like speaking about myself.
I know.
This is talk self-promotion. I don't do that. Or somebody might think I'm an introvert and this is something that an extrovert guy is, or somebody will say, I'm not from sales. I can't do this. How do we do this?
It's so true. And I'm an introvert. I know no one ever believed me, but I am. And self-promotion is not my thing either. And so I understand that it doesn't feel natural and it doesn't feel like something that you should need to do. But here's the deal. If you're not doing it and the person next to you is, you're going to start looking like you're not doing enough, even if you're doing twice as much. So I think one of the things that is helpful is when you put it into some kind of dashboard, or, and I love the word dashboard because it's a way not only for you to communicate what your working on and what you're quantifying, but it's a way for you to personally keep track of what you're doing so that you can assess yourself, hey, how did I do this month compared to last month? And where do we have seasonal dips in outreach and things like that? So it's actually a helpful personal tool to be tracking this and putting it on a dashboard for yourself. It'll be really helpful when you're coming up to performance reviews and you're asked, what have your accomplishments been for this quarter or this year? So I think when you look at it as, hey, this is kind of a self-development tool that I'm sharing with my manager and saying, hey, I just want you to know I've been putting this together for myself, which has helped me increase my customer outreach because of, this organization. Then it doesn't feel so much like you're saying, hey, look at me, I'm so great, but it feels like, this is something I'm doing to help my self-development, yet your manager still gets the benefit of seeing the quantified work in the dashboard.
All right. So to have a dashboard, which then goes back to step one, which is to quantify the ways that you add value, because I would assume those are the elements or metrics that come onto the dashboard. And what I also understand is to have a distribution plan, and it's the distribution plan is too important for one to let one's boss be in charge of it. We have to take control of the distribution plan because it's not possible for the boss to do it.
Yeah, I think in some professions, like sales professions, or, if you're a lawyer and you have billable hours, these things kind of come naturally. But in a lot of our positions, the majority of our positions, we don't have these internal measures. And so what I want to make sure people understand is that's not a reason or an excuse not to measure it. It's just that you might have to be proactive and create that structure for yourself and share it with your boss versus having an internal company structure that automatically does it for you.
All right. So we've spoken about quantifying value. We've spoken about having a distribution plan. What else can help me really get out there to increase my visibility?
So I think we started to go in this direction. So I think mindset is a very important thing. And one of the things I always coach people to do is take an ownership mindset, meaning it doesn't matter what your role in the company is, but if you start to look at your environment as if you're an owner, as if you were somebody who was truly invested in making the organization or the department or the market great, what might you do differently to make sure that's happening? Because when you start looking at it, instead of this is my job and this is not my job, but you look at it as I'm a part of this company, I'm contributing to the success of this company, you start to see things that you might be able to get involved with or even initiate that can help the company as a whole. And sometimes those things are not tasks within our job, but sometimes they're not even tasks within the company. It's something that you suggest. But when you do this, then the people around you start to see you as somebody who's creative, somebody who cares about the success of the organization and those around you. And it can really have a ripple effect on the perception, on how people view your brand, on how you show up as a leader. And I think a lot of people who don't have a leadership title in the organization sometimes don't feel like they have permission to act like a leader, but I think that's a mistake. I think we all can be a role model in terms of our attitude and our approach and how we partner with others and how we bring ideas to the table. And even if your job isn't to be the director or whatever the title is of the head of the team, I think you can still be viewed and act with those same qualities.
So nice. You said to give yourself permission to act as a leader. And one of the ways you do that is to start with an ownership mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes folks here might think that, man, I'm already putting in 12, 14 hours doing just the things that I'm supposed to be doing. How do I find the bandwidth to do extra stuff or to take some of this stuff? And any thoughts or any tips there?
Yeah, sometimes it's actually not about doing more, but it's more about how you approach your work. So it's more about how you show up. It's more about how you project an attitude in a meeting. And, maybe it's recognizing someone else on your team. So it can be a lot of subtle things. Maybe your team had a setback and you're the one who is looking for the silver linings, or you're the one who, cheers up the rest of the team. It can really be, it doesn't have to be extra work or extra projects. That certainly can be one thing, but it can actually just be how you collaborate with the team and how you motivate others. Sometimes being a role model and demonstrating a positive attitude, especially in difficult times like we're in right now, is one, it's definitely noticed. So I think everybody should recognize that it's definitely noticed. And two, it'll definitely be remembered, because this isn't going to be the last time that our organizations or our economy faces challenges. And so when these decisions are made later for promotions or for selecting people to lead, the organization's going to remember those people who were able to face ambiguity with a positive attitude and with some creative ideas, or who were able to get bad news, but yet find the positives in that and motivate the rest of the team to see that too. So I think we don't have to think about adding work, but we could think about how we approach our work.
Wow, that is so well said. And who wouldn't want a person like this in their team, or who wouldn't want such a person to move up to the next role or to take on that challenging role which opens up? Because across time, one has shown that the person can be positive and take up challenges. And it's not a question about doing more work. And certainly it adds, early on, you use this one word, likability.
Mm-hmm.
And where I'm coming from, if you were to say one of leadership competencies was likability, most of us would have a huge problem with that, because most of our leaders say, I'm going to get the job done. And, it doesn't matter if I have to use the stick. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about likability within this context, because it seems to me it's linked somehow to visibility and building a personal brand.
It really is. And, maybe if you are the head of the organization, you can use a stick and get away with it. But for the rest of us, that probably isn't always an option, especially if you're more at an entry level and you don't have that positional authority. So, first I'll jump into the research. There's so much out there that talks about the fact that people who are likable often get more information shared with them. They often get mistakes forgiven more easily, and they certainly get more promotions. So when you look at the data, you think there has to be a reason for this, because you don't really see in a performance review a likability box. So you're thinking, how can this all be happening when they're not getting measured on it? But the fact is, humans are very biased. We have a lot of unconscious biases. And one of the things we know is we enjoy working with people who are cooperative and collaborative and don't cause us to have headaches. And so, when we're sitting around making decisions about who we want on our team, or, who we want to go on that business trip with us, we're automatically going to think about the people who are going to make this easy. Now, certainly that could be somebody who's technically strong and not very likable, but we're always going to be thinking about that likability factor in there. And the fact is, if you have two technically strong people and one's a grouch and one's very likable, the likable person's going to win out. And if this person's also getting more information because people are more open and willing to share, that person's automatically going to have more opportunities for success, because they're getting more, they're learning more, they're more creative, they know more people are on their side. If they're getting mistakes forgiven, and it's true. I mean, think about, there's a really simple example. If you think about us, if you have a meeting and you have two people and they both show up late, but one is just the company grouch and always down and always finding the negatives, and the other one is the person who is always bringing cookies and sunshine, then you're going to be much more forgiving of the one who is cookies and sunshine than the one who is always a grouch. And so it's just the way that humans operate. So as much as nobody will probably admit to likability being a factor, as humans with a very biased brain, we are always at a unconscious level factoring this into our decisions.
So true. And, given two people who are equally technically competent, my sense is the one who's more likable is the one who will get opportunities to go client
Mhm.
facing. Nobody's going to send grouches to face a client, no matter how technically qualified one is, right? So
Yeah, great
likability is
point.
important. Thank you for speaking about it because nobody really wants to speak about it. And you did mention research, and there is a lot of research out there that talks about likability, but sometimes we think that, oh, this is not real. This is not real science stuff. Okay, so we've been talking about building visibility. We have spoken about elements of building a brand. We're talking a little bit about now getting out there. So you've spoken about the metrics of how one adds value, the distribution plan, having an ownership mindset. What else is coming up?
So I think one of the things we can all do is, as well, is look for opportunities to cross collaborate. Some organizations are already very cross functional in their operations, but others are very siloed and tend to be very much focused on one small team of people. And so even though I know a lot of times people think about visibility as visibility at the higher levels and making sure the people at the decision maker table know, I think it's also important to be visible across the organization broadly because everybody's moving in different circles and being influenced by different people. So, again, the more people who you can show your skill set and value to the organization, the more success and opportunities you're going to get. And maybe some of those opportunities will be lateral moves. But as we know today, that as organizations are transforming and reorganizing, then your department may go away, but another department may emerge that could be a great fit. And if they know about you or the decision makers over there know about you, even if it's a lateral move, that's going to be a great opportunity for you to do something different, build your skills, build your network. So I think we need to be thinking not just vertically, but also horizontally and finding cross-functional projects to work on, whether or not they're in our job description, can be a really helpful way to become known across the organization.
So not only build visibility at the higher levels, but across organizations. So therefore, look for projects. Yes, I see how this could be of value also. And yet, this is again something that we are so hesitant to do, partly because we make excuses in terms of being so caught up with existing work. But like you said, we could, even if you're just attending those meetings, we could make a decision to really bring that positivity into the meetings that are happening, cross functional meetings, right? And there be seen as a leader with an ownership mindset.
I also think that, again, we always think that this is all additional work. So, like you said, it doesn't have to be additional work, but I don't. It can also be that when you build these relationships, it actually creates more efficiency in your job. And just as an example, when I was working in a function at one of my earlier companies, we often got a lot of reports and a lot of data we needed from the central HR team. And so what our team did is we decided to have a cookie party where we invited all of the HR folks there. We took an afternoon and we got to know them. And after that, guess who always got their reports first? It was our team. And that wasn't the intention, but the fact is that when you build relationships with people in different functions and you have that likability, that trust, that camaraderie, when you have a favor to ask or when you need something that is outside your department, you're more likely to get faster service, or people are going to be more willing to help you even if they're busy. So I think we can actually create efficiencies by building these relationships. And at a minimum, it can help us be more creative in our day-to-day functions. So a lot of times when we come across a problem, we sit down with our team and come up with the same solutions, but you might actually come up with a more creative and effective answer if you reach out to a team that you don't typically work with and say, look, we're dealing with this problem. We know it's something that you've dealt with. We'd love to get your ideas, and maybe you'll get to that solution faster. So I do think it's, again, not thinking about piling on work, but thinking about how you can use these situations to be more efficient and effective in your work while also driving visibility and building your network.
So true. And you've made a very powerful statement that building relationships across functions contributes towards efficiencies. I think, perhaps we've never had it articulated so clearly. So a lot of what you're saying really is not stuff that is, one has to be really intentional. So if one wants to move up, if one is committed to being relevant in career, these are not options. These are things we have to be able to find ways to incorporate. Otherwise, well, the risks are higher for those who don't.
Yeah, and I really do believe that feeling empowered to do these things can have an effect on your confidence and how you show up as a leader and how you do your work. And I feel like people who embrace being more visible and building their brand may initially be saying, "Oh, I don't have time for this. This sounds like a lot of work." But once you kind of get on that path, I think most people figure out that it actually is so helpful because opportunities now come to them, information now comes to them, new ideas come to them, people come to them, and so you build a system where once it's built, and yeah, it does take a little bit of time, especially if this is new to you, but it all comes back to you and kind of raises you up. And I think that's what we're trying to get to with people, is not to create more work, not to create a situation where you feel like you're adding 5 more hours to your day, but to say, how can we work smarter to really reap the benefits of a collective set of ideas so that we all are more visible. And that's one of the last tips I want to mention is the idea of celebrating others. This is such an easy way to increase your visibility, your leadership presence, your brand, by celebrating others who are doing great things. And so if you have somebody in another department who helps you out, it takes 2 minutes to send an email to that person thanking them and copying their manager to say, "Hey, this idea really got me out of a bind," or "Your suggestion really changed the way I move forward on this project." A lot of companies have internal reward systems. So, different ways to celebrate employees, and many people don't use them, but these can be, again, very easy ways to quickly, type a quick email and build likability for yourself. A lot of times people will reciprocate and get back to your boss down the road and say, "Hey, you've been doing a great job." So, I mean, again, I think you can't look at any of these things in isolation. Everything you do creates a ripple effect that kind of comes back to you. And so celebrating others is a really great one too. If you tend to be one of those humble people who's like, "Oh, I don't want to pat my own back." But now you can pat other people's back. You can say, "Hey, I don't know if you guys know, but this team just had a really successful project," and raise other people up, and it will raise you up as well.
So we can actually find ways to do this in which are authentic. We don't really have to copy somebody else's style or expect to be an extrovert, but just by building others, which I think anybody can do, right? Is another way to in turn build one's own leadership visibility. That is absolutely awesome. So Dawn, you've shared a lot of great stuff with us, and I know we are coming close to the end of our time, but before we close, tell us a little bit about this book that you've written called Switchers.
Yeah, so Switchers is a book that is very process oriented on if you've decided you want to make a career switch. It really gives you the roadmap on how to do it. So what we know is that the current hiring process is very much designed for traditional job seekers who are moving on a traditional path. So the thing I love about Switchers is that it really lays out a proactive and intentional job search strategy that helps you get to where you want to be, helps you get in front of the decision makers. And as a licensed psychologist, I have included a lot of psychology principles because one of the things we all know is that whenever you're in any kind of interaction, the human brain has a lot of say that we don't always recognize is happening. So what I did is I outlined a lot of things that are happening both in the job seeker's mind and the hiring manager's mind so that we can get around these biases and not waste time and energy getting stuck in these places where a lot of job seekers do get stuck. So it's definitely not just for switchers. It's definitely a book that takes the job search process and elevates it to a level that's very proactive and helps anyone who's looking for a different opportunity to take control of their career, feel empowered, and get in front of the decision makers.
All right. So the book is called Switchers and it's available on Amazon. Is there a Kindle version available?
There's a Kindle and an Audible version as well.
Available. So folks, I'm going to put the links to this book in the podcast description. And this book would also be helpful for those of us who are in careers, not looking at switching, but perhaps building our own personal brand.
So a lot of the concepts we talked about today are in the book. And the general premise that, and kind of the last chapter, how I summarize this book is that if you're doing these things that I've talked about, building your visibility, your brand, your leadership presence, your network, certainly it'll be helpful when you're looking for a job. But my goal for everybody is that when you do these things consistently, you won't have to look for a job because these opportunities will start coming to you. And that's when you know you've incorporated these principles in a way that is really elevating your career. So the entire premise of the book is certainly about creating a career management strategy for yourself so that you're never in a position where you're looking for a job. And this is especially important in economic uncertainty like we're facing now, because a lot of people are struggling and they're worried. And my thought is that if you pay attention to your career management on a regular basis, you will always land on your feet regardless of what the economy is doing.
That sounds like just the book a lot of us need to be reading at this point in time, especially so that it helps us in the coming few years. So as we close, Dawn, what are some messages that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I think one of the messages I want to leave that's particularly important right now, while we're all a little bit stressed about what's happening in the job market, is that, a lot of people have always felt that job security comes with a company. And if you work hard and you do all of the right things, that company will always be there for you. And I think what we're seeing now is that that's not always the case. There are certainly situations that are beyond our control that are going to impact our career. So what I would want everybody to take away is that, job security needs to be something you take within. It's not something external. And when you build your skills and you're consistently reinventing and growing in terms of your abilities, and you're consistently building a brand and making sure you're visible, and you're consistently building a network and creating ambassadors who know what you do, know the value you add, and bring information and opportunities to you, that's the true meaning of job security for all of us. And it's something that we need to start looking at as internal versus external.
That is awesome. Dawn, thank you so much. I think you have shared tremendous amount of wisdom with us. We are very, very grateful. And we're just very excited that you've spent time. So folks, I encourage you to check out Dr. Dawn Graham's website, check out her articles and resources, really beautifully written, practical stuff that I think will help us really contribute towards career management. And do check out her book, because I think it's something that we all need to be reading at this point in time. So go to the link and check out the book. So Dawn, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you on the show in the near future.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please connect with us on coachtoolbox@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review this channel. Details of our ICF-approved coach training programs and our services as executive coaches and coaching supervisors are on www.globalcoachtrust.org. See you in our next session.